Quite regularly on this channel, I talk about some of the best, the most interesting, the latest and greatest when it comes to mods for various Fallout games and even Skyrim. Today, we aren't doing that. We're looking at an objective metric, the top 10 most downloaded mods for Fallout New Vegas just ever. When I made this video for Fallout 4 and Skyrim, it was a bit more complicated. I had to add up some of the mod downloads on Xbox and then add them to PC, looking at Oldrim versus SC. When it comes to Fallout New Vegas, things are actually a lot simpler. It's just the top downloaded mods on Nexus because those are the top downloaded mods overall. Yet, even despite that, there's a pretty interesting story with several of these mods, as some in the top 10 are actually largely abandoned and many users recommend you don't use them, and some of the other ones have literally just gotten updates in the past couple of weeks. It's a super interesting list to look at, and I can almost guarantee some of you will be pretty surprised as to what's actually on this list. And to be clear here, I am looking at the total cumulative downloads. It's not unique downloads. If you download the same file 5 times, that will count 5 times towards the total. Although unfortunately, I do have some bad news for all of you. Fallout isn't currently supported on mobile platforms. And I mean, even though supposed Fallout 4 Switch leaks ended up just being complete nonsense and never happening, but you know what is a great MMORPG that you can play on the go? Today's video sponsor with Moonlight Sculptor. Moonlight Sculptor is developed by XL Games, the same developers by the already quite popular sandbox MMORPG Arcade. And Moonlight Sculptor has all of the staples of a great RPG. A fully fleshed out and immersive story that's actually pretty good because it's based on a real novel. There's several character classes to choose from, and then from there, you can go into battle, whether it be in dungeons, like the one through the chaotic entrance, which are ever changing, but also have a ton of tough enemies and powerful bosses within, or try and become a champion with weekly tournaments that feature great rewards. And all along the way, you could customize your character even further between level ups and crafting your own weapons and armor, or even customizing your own home. And one of the best parts is you can stay active offline, as you can continue the gameplay and action-packed combat in sleep mode, where you can still get some of that valuable loot and experience. On June 8th, the first major update did release, adding the 150 floor Merkin Tower, a totally new party dungeon with the Twisted Abyss sewer maze, and even a new raid with the Tyrant's Ominous Temple. The game is always getting more and more things to do, so don't wait, and using my link in the video description, you could help support this channel and get Moonlight Sculptor totally for free. But starting it off, looking at the number 10 most downloaded mod for Fallout New Vegas ever, we do have Eve, otherwise known as the Essential Visual Enhancements, coming in with 3.7 million downloads in total. So Eve was actually a pretty popular mod for Fallout 3, and a lot of people were anticipating its release for Fallout New Vegas, and when it did drop for New Vegas, it came with quite a bit in the way of additional features. At its core, what it's really going to do is overhaul the effects you see in Fallout New Vegas. This predominantly around some of the explosive or energy weapon effects that you can see throughout the game. So that visual effect you get when you're actually firing an energy weapon, the beam of light coming out, or even the particles when an enemy is vaporized. This also extending to things like explosions from other weapons. Mini nukes in particular got quite a nice overhaul with this one, and even things like fire effects, whether it be fires burning on the ground or typically when you're setting somebody on fire. That's really the core or main appeal of this mod, making that aspect of Fallout New Vegas look quite a bit better on one hand, but also it feels like they pop and stand out quite a bit more when you're firing an energy weapon in particular. In addition, sometimes the meshes and textures on energy weapons are also upgraded with this mod. There's miscellaneous effects added, some of these being added with later updates, like blood effects, so when you take down an enemy, you'll definitely notice a difference in the blood and how it interacts with the world or the enemy, as well as there's splashing effects when shooting water that were updated, and actually these in particular look really good. And I feel like you really notice the change with this one. Of course, I had a few before and afters there, and if you don't play New Vegas too much, you could probably still spot that these do pop a bit more. They are getting a lot more attention with this mod, and it does feel like a pretty big visual improvement over what is there by default. On one hand, it does feel a bit more modern and pleasant, but also it just kind of makes these energy weapons feel a bit more fun and satisfying to use. And one of the craziest parts about this mod is, even though it's about to be 10 years old, being uploaded in July of 2011, it literally just got a new update a couple of weeks ago, in June of 2021. So after 10 years, it is still getting updates. It was a relatively minor one, just some bug fixes, but it is not abandoned, which is insane. And that update is actually super relevant, as it's those updates, or some of the more recent updates, that actually got it onto this list in the first place. As the mod behind this one is only 20 8,000 downloads behind, which is relatively small compared to the scale of this list, and a few years ago, this mod wasn't actually in the top 10. But moving on, looking at number 9, this is another really interesting one, and one you're probably familiar with. That is Project Nevada, featuring just 3.8 million downloads, and that is definitely a number that has been slowing down as of late. This mod really does several different things. It almost is several mods combined into one. One aspect of it is trying to modernize Fallout New Vegas, so it adds in things like bullet time as an option. You can now sprint in the game, a dedicated grenade hotkey. For some of the helmets in the game, you'll get a visor overlay, making them more immersive, or sometimes actually having functional elements like night vision built into a helmet with a toggle key. You have variable zoom on weapons, so you could zoom in more on a scope, better inventory sorting if you want it, as well as unique features like actually being able to charge up weapons to kind of shoot out a beam and deal more damage. In addition to some of those mechanics or new features, it also adds in a ton of new content. There's a full cybernetic system added with this, all kinds of implants for you to find and install. A ton of new weapons and armors are added, these applying to both you and other NPCs. So a lot of times you will find other NPCs using new items. These typically trying to be pretty lore friendly, or if you haven't played New Vegas in a while and you download this mod, you may not even realize those are totally new. Several of them are actually from Fallout 3 or from older Fallouts recreated for New Vegas, and it even features a big bounce patch, making the game a bit harder, reducing the bullet sponginess of both you and enemies. And as you're probably noticing, it almost feels like this is several mods combined into one, and it kind of is, but fortunately it does have a highly modular system with the configuration menu, so you could turn on or off a lot of these features or pick and choose what you want. Although something pretty interesting, and especially if you haven't been following New Vegas modding as of late, this is actually a pretty unpopular mod now. Very few people still recommend you use Project Nevada, despite it being one of the go-to mods back in the day and for a while after. This being more so than anything else a byproduct of time. It hasn't seen an update since 2014. Several aspects of the mod either don't work great to begin with, like some of the balance changes mess with the AI, kind of messing how the game feels and plays overall, or with subsequent updates or other mods coming out have become outdated, or just there's better alternatives now. One of the big issues is it really is just a giant mod. It does so many different things, and as a result either conflicts with some other mods, leads to its own type of problems that have lingered, or some people just don't want this much from one mod and would rather be downloading individual mods that do similar things. And typically what you'll see nowadays is people asking about Project Nevada, and a lot of people will instead recommend several smaller mods. The Just Assorted series of mods, as well as B42, have replaced many of the core features like weapon throwing, sprinting, etc., and even actually added quite a bit more that Project Nevada never covered in the first place. So in summary, Project Nevada is still one of the largest mods ever released for New Vegas, but just due to a byproduct of time and the modding scene advancing past it, not many people still use it or recommend it. Although despite that, it is still an incredible mod, and one of the metrics that really shows this is the endorsements. It's the 9th most downloaded mod for New Vegas, but it's the 2nd most endorsed mod out of the ones I'm covering. It has 121,000 endorsements, and it's only 300 short of the #1 most endorsed mod. But then next up, we do have the Fallout character overhaul. And I would actually say this is one of the most surprising mods to be on this list, at least for me. But at its core, what this will do is make it so the characters of Fallout New Vegas look better, specifically with their faces. And this is definitely an overhaul. As you'll notice with some of the before and afters in the background, some characters do look distinctively different. In many ways better, whether it be higher resolution, better looking eyes, eyebrows, etc., or even just more depth to the number of races in Fallout New Vegas, but also again quite distinctively different. This applies to many of the NPCs all across the Mojave, and also some you may not expect. Raiders get a custom and more distinctive look. Ghouls also get a bit of an overhaul. There's also some partially ghoulified faces that you do have as an option to your character. As far as the character creation system, it adds in a ton. A lot of this is really what you're finding in the world of Fallout New Vegas. So over 130 new races, many of those races actually being the races of characters in the world, but you also just get to choose from all of them. And really one of the big reasons this is so popular is it made characters generally look quite a bit better across the board all throughout your encounters in the Mojave. I know though, you could get things like texture upgrades for the world space, or even body upgrades for the body textures or armors. At the end of the day, you're spending a lot of time actually looking at people's faces, and that's where this mod became so popular. Today, it does exist with some issues. It is one one of the most comprehensive mods out right now and still recommended sometimes, but there are definitely alternatives or some bug fixing you'll need to do if you download this one. One of the big reasons people opt for alternatives is the Fallout character overhaul does tend to change the look more so than different options out there. Like for me personally, some of the NPCs just look a little bit too different than their original renditions with this mod for me to actively use it. Although one of the other reasons it is still pretty popular is New Vegas Redesign 3, which is another quite comprehensive mod for the game, uses this as a dependency. So overall, it really is one of those mods that was and even still today, this does have a pretty hardcore following and a lot of people that still use it. Then next up we have what is probably one of the most obvious ones on this list, that with New Vegas Anti-Crash. I'm sure many of you who have played Fallout New Vegas on PC actually have this mod installed, and basically what happened was New Vegas released as a buggy and crash-prone game. Over time, some of the bugs went away, but the crash proneness is still largely there. Even today in 2021, if you try and play New Vegas without New Vegas Anti-Crash, you'll crash somewhat often, more often than some of the more modern games. So New Vegas Anti-Crash comes out, it reduces the crashing to a significant degree, doesn't perfect it, but things are way better with this mod, and well, really it's easy dots to connect. One of the greatest RPGs of all time, but it has a crashing problem, a mod that reduces that crashing problem. Lo and behold, it becomes one of the most downloaded mods of all time. One of the big reasons being that most people will typically download this even if you're not going for a heavily modded playthrough. And this is still true. Even today in 2021, this is the go-to anti-crash mod. Sometimes a couple of other ones are added atop of it, but most of the time this is the one you want to download even still. There's some pretty interesting statistics with this one. Despite it being the 7th in total downloads, it actually is the 2nd in unique downloads with 1.5 million, only 18,000 behind the #1 mod. Lots of people downloaded this mod one time and never again. Also pretty interesting, both New Vegas Anti-Crash and the Fallout character overhaul are the newest mods on this list. New Vegas Anti-Crash releasing in November 2013, the Fallout character overhaul in December 2013, which is kind of crazy that these mods that came out 3 years after Fallout New Vegas are in the top 10 mods for that game overall. Every other mod on this list either came out in 2010 or the first half of 2011. Yet 2 of them came out 3 years after the game's release and are still some of the most downloaded mods of all time, which is kind of a huge feat if you ask me. It makes me wonder if in another 10 years, when inevitably people are still playing New Vegas, these mods continue to climb up the spots or end up even higher on this list. Next up, we do have Nevada Skies with 4.3 million downloads, and this one is particularly special as Nevada Skies actually received a fairly major content update in June 2021, aka this month. This being the final version of the mod, so I wouldn't be surprised if there's not too many more updates in the years to come. But either way, this is a pretty simple and straightforward one. At its core, it's a weather mod for Fallout New Vegas. Early on, what it did was things like add in dust storms, some better rain or rain effects in general, and some basic weathers like that. For pretty much all of the Fallout games in the top 10 most downloaded mods, there is a weather mod of some kind, and for Fallout New Vegas, Nevada Skies fit that bill. One of the big reasons being, it was actually one of the first mods to come out for the game in general, releasing in the same month Fallout New Vegas released, which makes it pretty remarkable that now, almost 11 years later, it just got a massive update and overhaul, as now it actually features over 400 new weather types for Fallout New Vegas, a configuration menu for basically everything. You could toggle which type of weathers or climates are on or off. You could actually toggle some of these sounds, so how loud the rain, wind, or thunder is. A lot of this used to be through the Pip-Boy, but now it just recently got its own dedicated menu. Weathers really do have a visual impact with this mod, so you can see even though the sky is the most notable change, the world space also gets quite a substantial lighting overhaul. One of the more recent updates to the mod made it so interiors are impacted, so how lit up an interior world space is will vary by the time of day. And as far as what these 400 weathers are made up of, you have some of the things you'd expect: rain, some snow, dust storms, nuclear weathers, and a lot more. There's actually some pretty crazy weathers added in with this one. A lot of these are toggled off by default, but you can turn them on or actually make them the only weathers that'll appear in the world if you want to go that route. And it getting such a high spot at the 6th most downloaded mod overall really comes from 2 major things. One, again, those weather mods always being particularly popular, and this being the first major weather mod for New Vegas, but also over the decade this has been out, it has gotten fairly consistent or somewhat regular updates. So people have just been consistently coming back to it, adding up to that total download amount. Next up, at the 5th most downloaded mod for New Vegas, we have another simple one, Fallout Mod Manager. Pretty straightforward with this one. Do you want to mod Fallout New Vegas? Well, at release and for those first couple of years, this was the definitive and main option you had for a mod manager for Fallout New Vegas. This released in 2010 before Mod Organizer 1 in 2011, and Nexus Mod Manager didn't even come out until 2015. Both of those, Mod Organizer 2 and Nexus Mod Manager, are the more popular options today than Fallout Mod Manager, but more so than anything else, this is a relic from the times of Fallout 3, but then also updated and extended for Fallout New Vegas. It does have simpler functionality. You can install, activate, and remove mods, actually create packaged mods with this if you wanted to, and similar to New Vegas Anti-Crash, I don't think there's a lot of explanation to do with this one, although an interesting observation. Fallout Mod Manager would actually be the third highest download if you include the forked, more updated version of the mod that was kept up to date by a separate developer and got its own mod page. So if you added those extra 500,000 downloads, it would actually be 2 spots higher. Then we do have more perks, which is another really interesting one and is actually the one that's kind of cheating the system a bit. So what this is going to do is add in more perks, traits, and companion perks to Fallout New Vegas. The new traits with this are quite fun and unique, some of them actually warranting totally new playstyles. So of course you take traits right when you create your character at the start of a game. Some of these add pretty interesting or totally distinct starts. We get a bunch of doctor supplies off the bat, but immediately start with some bad karma. You can make it so you immediately are vilified by every major faction, but start with 2 raider companions that are quite strong. There's a boatload of perks added in by this one. In particular, it really makes companion focused play super viable. There are a ton of different perks at all different ranks that will buff up your companions and make them deal a ton of damage in combat. It's actually kind of ridiculous and perhaps a bit overpowered, but also some of the more traditional or interesting perks from Fallout. Make it so you deal more damage against certain enemy types. There's actually one where you black out and wake up with a ton of extra caps, but potentially some stuff missing from your inventory, things that will increase your stats during certain times of day. There's quite a few perks that are companion specific. That's the companion perk aspect of this mod. So for some of these, it'll actually take the default perk a companion will give you and give you a level 2 version of it if you have that companion following you. For some of the other ones, it'll make it so it's just a new perk, but it requires you have a certain companion with you at the time, which actually is a pretty interesting mechanic. This really does a lot for companions overall and their functionality in New Vegas. And there's a couple of factors that make this so popular and one of the most downloaded mods overall, despite maybe you not thinking it would be. First off, it released in the same month of Fallout New Vegas. Whenever you see mods close to release, especially ones actually adding in new content, they always just get a boatload of downloads, and this definitely benefits from that. These new perks are very lore friendly, they fit into the game naturally, and they make subsequent playthroughs very interesting and just a lot more fun. But one of the other reasons this is so popular is it's actually broken up into several different files. So at its core, this is broken up into 3 separate files: more perks, more traits, and more companion perks. This is going to vastly inflate the overall number of downloads because a lot of people are downloading 3 things instead of 1 thing, like many of the other mods are only 1 singular file download. And this is completely reflected in the numbers. This mod, despite being the 4th most downloaded mod for New Vegas overall, has the least unique downloads out of any mod in the top 10. Today, there are a few other mods that are a bit more updated or add in more functionality, a bit more refined, so it's not recommended all that often, but it's not like you shouldn't or can't use it. It doesn't brick your game or anything like that. It's just not been as popular as some of the more recent releases. Next up, we do have the mod configuration menu, that with 4.7 million downloads. The mod configuration menu is one of those ones that is just extremely impressive. All it does is add in a new menu choice where you actually get a configuration menu that supports the vast majority of mods out there. So if you're using Project Nevada, if you're using Nevada Skies and you want to tweak some of the settings, you open up the mod configuration menu and then can tweak the settings in there. This in place of other things like using your Pip-Boy or some kind of workaround as far as that, like a terminal placed somewhere. And the simple reason it is so widely downloaded is there is no good alternative. There aren't many other mods doing something like this, and the vast majority of mods, even many mods released in 2021 for Fallout New Vegas, still use the mod configuration menu for settings like this. And it's a staple even outside of New Vegas. For Fallout 4 too, there's a mod configuration menu which is widely used by most new mods. Although it is still pretty impressive that a mod from 2013 is still very actively used. Like when I mod New Vegas, this is still one of those core 5 to 10 mods I always download if I'm modding the game. Then we do have weapon mods expanded Stranded or WMX. This is a particularly special mod, and I feel like the legacy of this one is going to be one of the most notable legacies of any mod and mod author for Fallout. So at its core, what WMX is going to do is just add in more weapon mods for Fallout New Vegas. Although some of you may remember that Fallout 3 actually didn't have weapon mods, but Fallout New Vegas did get weapon mods. And really the big reason this is a thing is this same mod author created a hugely popular weapon mod for Fallout 3. When Obsidian was making Fallout New Vegas, they took notice of that, probably used it while playing Fallout 3 and were like, hey, this is a really cool mechanic. And then when making Fallout New Vegas, just made it a feature of the game. So Anastar, the mod author behind this, is probably the person we have to thank for weapon mods being a thing in Fallout New Vegas in the first place. And despite it being a thing, it was a little bit bare bones by default. A lot of weapons may have only had one weapon mod, and there was a plethora of weapons that didn't have any weapon mods at all. And at its core, what WMX is going to do is flesh this out to make it so nearly every weapon in Fallout New Vegas has 3 distinctive weapon mods to choose from. These doing things like adding a silencer, sometimes adding a scope, increasing damage, increasing accuracy, etc. These scattered all throughout the Mojave, so you have to find them, equip them. It also does add in a couple of new weapons. This is an optional file with this mod. It's kind of an afterthought, I would say, for the mod overall, but it is still a pretty cool weapon pack for Fallout New Vegas. I think many of you may be shocked to find that WMX is the second most downloaded mod. One of the reasons it's so far up is, one, similar to more perks, it is split up into a couple of different downloads that will definitely inflate the numbers overall, but not as much with this one. I think at its core, it's just a super easy mod to download and just use forever with New Vegas. Like if this was integrated as a fundamental feature, it wouldn't really feel all that different. It works seamlessly with the game, and it's something that really adds a lot overall, being able to actually mod basically every weapon and have several choices when doing so. And although some other weapon mods have come out in the years since this one, it is still pretty much the definitive option and widely used even in 2021. But then last but not least, as we finally get into the single most downloaded mod for Fallout New Vegas, we do have the NMC texture pack for New Vegas. I think for some of you, this will come as no surprise. For some others, you might be like, really? A texture pack? You may have noticed a theme throughout all of this video that several of the mods we're looking at are visually improving or overhauling New Vegas, and it's really no surprise to me that NMC is at the top. At its core, what it'll do is make the world space and some of the structures or objects you find in New Vegas look better. And to be clear, this doesn't affect things like armors, weapons, NPCs, characters at all. This solely impacts the world space, the landscape, buildings, cars, even miscellaneous things like signs you find throughout the world. And really at its core, what it's doing is making some of those textures look better. Sometimes being more realistic, basically all of the time better than what they look like by default. Sometimes this in pure resolution, other times just in the aesthetic or style of it. And really the reason this is so widely downloaded is basically everyone wants New Vegas to look better. It's a great game, but it's not the greatest looking game in the world. NMC is not a complete overhaul or going to fix that entirely, but it is a pretty big step in the right direction. For years now, if you've been modding Fallout New Vegas and you want to make your game look better, this is the mod you download. Typically a ton of other mods also, but NMCs as well as things like Baja New Vegas are some of the core downloads. NMCs mainly because it just affects so many different things in the world, and it has for literally a decade now. That is why this mod is so popular. 10 years ago, people wanted to make New Vegas look better. This is the mod you downloaded. 10 years later, this is still the mod you download for that. Of course, has received updates over the time, some bug fixes here or there, and actually even some additional optional files in just 2020. And although it does get some help by being broken up into several different files, it also just has the most unique downloads of any New Vegas mod, so that's not really the reason it's at the top. It's the reason it has such a massive lead over the second mod, actually having almost 5 million more downloads, but just a hugely popular mod. People at the end of the day don't really like the way New Vegas looks, and there's been several mods in the top 10 trying to change or fix that. And actually a huge shout out to NMC because he has just recently released almost the exact same thing for Fallout 4 in the past couple of weeks. Another near comprehensive texture overhaul for Fallout 4's Commonwealth, very similar to this texture overhaul for New Vegas. But with that said, that is a look at the top 10 most downloaded mods for Fallout New Vegas. I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments. Which one of these was surprising to you or most surprising to you in general, as I think there's quite a few pretty shocking examples on this list. For me, I would definitely say either more perks being as high as it was or the Fallout character overhaul being on the list was pretty surprising. I definitely wouldn't predict mods like that to be this high up, but I think overall this really just shows the staying power of New Vegas and just how insane the modding scene is. Like, several of these mods got updates in the past year or so. Most of these mods are basically a decade old, and yet they are still getting updates and attention. That's crazy. One of the other pretty notable observations with this list compared to list for Fallout 4 and Skyrim I've done in the past, I'll have those videos linked in the description if you want to check them out. There's no body mod or a CBBE equivalent on these lists, even though for both Skyrim and Fallout 4 it had a mod like that. That's not to say that's not a huge part of the modding scene. Actually, several of the mods, like the 13th and 14th most downloaded, do fit that category, but at least with New Vegas they don't fall into the top 10 while they do with Skyrim and Fallout. Make of that what you will. Either way, hopefully you guys found this one informative. These videos take a ton of time and effort to actually put together, especially when modding such an old game, and that is one of the big reasons a sponsor really helps out. But with that said, as always, again, I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.